This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. This week, a double-header. Kumar will be here to talk about his trip to San Diego Comic-Con, who he talked to there, and how the con has changed since he was last there in 2004. Before that, a review of The Fade Out by Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, and Elizabeth Breitweiser. It's a nuanced, subtly told, complex story of Hollywood in 1948. Brandon and I will discuss that in a moment. But first, a reminder that this podcast needs your support. You can help by making your Amazon purchases through deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon. We get a cut of Amazon's profit, which helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of assembling this show every week. Okay, I'm talking with Brandon down in Okinawa. How are you?
I'm good.
So we decided to talk about The Fade Out, which was a 12-issue series by Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, and Elizabeth Breitweiser, the colorist. And this came out from Image. Now, we read, or at least I read, I can speak for you, I read the digital trades, which I found from reading up on the web that the trade, or at least the digital trade, is missing some essays that were in the original issues. There were some essays written by a guy named Devin Faraci about like old-time Hollywood. So I kind of like to read those, but I'm not sure if there's any way to get them other than buying the whole series again in issues.
Yeah, they have a hardcover that's coming out shortly too.
Yeah, maybe they'll put them in there.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like a prestige or ultimate version of the book.
Yeah. So I read the things that I read online. Well, there was a Comics Alliance interview with Brubaker, and he talks about how. Well, I put a quote from that in my notes. Brubaker says, "My uncle was John Paxton, who was a famous noir screenwriter. He wrote Murder My Sweet and Crossfire on the Beach and The Wild One. And his best friend was Adrian Scott, who was his producer, who was one of the Hollywood 10, who were blacklisted, right, for supposedly being communists. He was good friends with a lot of those guys like Dalton Trumbo, so I grew up hearing stories of that era since I was a little kid from my dad and my aunt. I knew a lot about that era, so I was trying to think of a way into it, and I thought of a guy who was blacklisted, and his best friend is a guy who has PTSD from the war, so they make this pact that they'll partner up, and one will do the writing and the other will be the front. So I was feeling like it felt like he had done his research, and so now I know why. It's something that he's been into for most of his life.
Right.
And also there's a blog, criminalcomic.blogspot.jp. This blog, I didn't get the name of the guy who's doing it, but everything that Brubaker and Phillips have done, he blogs about, which has mostly been the series Criminal, but then sometimes they do other things like this. Have you read any of their other stuff?
That's the first book I ever read from them.
Okay. Now, of course, I read Brubaker's Captain America, but I have not read Criminal at all. I don't know. I'm never sure if I'm interested in noir stuff or not. I mean, he seems to do, when he's not doing superhero stuff, he's done a lot of noirish stuff. And I'm not sure why he keeps kind of going back to that well, but...
was it his uncle, you said?
Right, his uncle was actually a noir screenwriter, so it seems like it runs in the family.
Or he might have been just like really enamored with his uncle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately decided to become a writer. And if you really respect somebody, I guess, you kind of try to draw those connections.
Yeah.
I'm just speculating, though. I don't know.
Yeah. So, as was mentioned in that quotation, Charlie Parrish is the main character. He has PTSD because he went to the World War II, and it's never really explained what happened. But whatever he experienced there has left him unable to come up with any writing ideas. And this other guy, Gil Mason, is a writer who has been blacklisted. But what confused me about that was that Gil told Charlie to turn him in as being communist to get him blacklisted. And I don't really understand what was in that for Gil. Why would he want him to do that?
It was kind of explained kind of in the background that Charlie has a reputation, right?
Yeah.
He wrote a story that became, well, he wrote a screenplay that came very close to winning an Oscar.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And they were very good friends, but it seemed like Gil was kind of stuck in the B movie.
Okay.
So in order to elevate his own work out of where he was stuck in, he used Charlie's name to write his own stories.
So he could have a chance to do better work, higher class work.
Right.
Okay.
I think there was also something that was like a backdoor deal that was a part of it that kind of worked into the whole mystery of who was pulling the strings and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The other, I guess you could call him the bad guy, was the main Fed.
You talking about? Are you talking about the kind of the studio guy? He's kind of working for the studio, and he helps to cover up things. Phil Brodsky.
No, the other guy.
You talking about the horn rim glasses guy?
Yeah, him.
Okay, yeah, and that's kind of a lingering mystery until later in the story who he is, but yeah.
So it seemed like there was a deal to keep. They had to give up somebody's name, and Dottie was actually kind of involved with the whole thing too.
Right, because initially she lies that she doesn't know who that is when Charlie's asking about the horn rim glasses guy.
Yeah. It was like they sacrificed Gil in order to keep that guy off the rest of the studio.
Yeah. Well, you say the bad guy. I mean, nobody's really good in this story.
Nobody's really good. That's why I said kind of the main bad guy.
Yeah, the other bad guys besides the main one, the lesser bad guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Charlie wakes up after this party. He wakes up in the bathtub, and he's in the living quarters of this Valeria Summers, the actress, and he finds her dead. And his immediate instinct is to try to cover up that he was there. And, you assume that it's because he doesn't want anyone to think that he killed her. But Brubaker says in the interview it was because he was afraid that the secret arrangement he has with Gil would be found out. And I guess that makes sense. But yeah, well, Brubaker admits that a lot of people probably didn't catch that. But yeah, that secret is really kind of central to a lot of the story. And you don't quite appreciate how much until the end. And actually, the ending, I don't want to talk about too much about the ending, spoilers, but I had a little trouble grasping it until I read the interview. It was like, oh, okay, that's what happened. I got confused a little bit there. But, I mean, the writing in this is rather subtle, and the pieces of things are kind of placed in there out of order on purpose, so that you have to kind of, read it several times to piece everything together. all the kind of background information, and there are a lot of characters who have had a lot of interactions with each other. So if you read it just through one time, you're likely to miss some things. Now, it's a relatively minor piece, but it was something that really stuck out to me, and I didn't see it mentioned in the interview or in the criminal blog. So, yeah, you mentioned Dottie. So she works at the studio, and she's what, PR person?
PR, yeah.
Yeah. And she and Charlie go to this event, and she says something about it being a date. And he's kind of confused about that. He's asking his actor friend, do you think it's a real date, or is she just kind of calling it a date? And the actor guy doesn't know. And during the event, then he decides, oh, no, this isn't really a date. She doesn't mean this to be a date. And then he gets kind of attracted to this other actress, the one who has replaced Val in the movie. They having to reshoot the scenes with Maya. And so then there's this panel. It's a single panel, and it says that Dottie is yelling in the restroom. It's Charlie's narration. And she's yelling, "Of course I didn't think it was a real date, idiot. God, just shut up." And she's crying and her mascara's running. And Charlie, apparently she meant it to be a real date, and he's really hurt her feelings, and he never realizes what he did. And later she's giving him the silent treatment, and he's like, "What did I do?" And Maya says, "Oh, give her some flowers and she'll forgive you." And so he does that, but he never understands what happened. And apparently Dottie is actually interested in him, but I don't know if it's because he's drinking all the time or the PTSD or what, but or maybe it's just how he thinks about her. I mean, the photographer, early on in the first volume, I think it's issue 3 or 4, the photographer...
It's like they're just friends, right?
Yeah, he says that Dottie's a real hot number, and Charlie says she's a friend of mine. And, he just kind of doesn't see her as anything more than kind of the studio PR person who's his friend. Where apparently she sees there could have been some potential between them. I just thought it was interesting how Brubaker set that up, that Charlie completely breaks her heart and never realizes it.
I like that. It's kind of like real life. You don't realize until like 20 years later that somebody was throwing themselves at you or whatever.
Uh-huh.
I liked that kind of realism in the story. It wasn't neatly tied up in a cute little package like typical Hollywood movie nowadays would be, right? So at the end, all the relationships have worked out, and everything comes to a climax and a resolution that is satisfying to the audience.
That's more like an indie film.
Uh-huh. Where it's got a message, it's got something to say. It's just not specifically designed to make you feel good at the end. Like, you don't... At the end of this story, I really didn't feel like there was this hugely satisfying resolution to the conflict. Just the way the story kind of lays out, and how he gets the information about what actually happened,
or what
mystery night,
what quote unquote might have happened.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's no justice, and he feels terrible, and the end.
Yeah, the end.
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe it's just my sheltered upbringing. My first reaction to something like this is that the sex in it is titillation. But I don't know, I've been reading some other things recently, not comics. Like, there was an article I read online about how, for example, in the 60s, the office of Newsweek magazine was described as a discreet orgy, because all the reporter guys and whoever would just like hit on all the young women who worked there, and do a lot of things that now would be considered sexual harassment. And in that era, the women felt like they couldn't say no in a lot of cases, whether they were interested or not. And you can see the same kind of thing happening in the story.
Well, there's a little bit of that. I wouldn't say that it would go to that kind of extreme, because it seems like the women are certainly in control of most of their sexual appetite.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially when it comes to Charlie, women want to have relationships with him. We're talking about the studio producers and that kind of thing. I wasn't around, but I would guess that that was pretty close to the real Hollywood back then.
Yeah, well, Brubaker says that whole thing about the producer having secret passage to come out in starlets' closets and come onto them was based on fact. Something that actually happened, including the little bit that he mentions there about the producer accidentally coming out in Bette Davis's dressing room one time and she almost stabbed him with a nail file. I guess that's also true.
Wow.
Not the, I don't know what the producer's name actually was. It's Thursby in the story, but yeah, that actually happened to someone.
Well, and if you go back to just some of the movies and the whole culture back then, not even that far back, maybe when did James Bond first come out? And I know
early 60s.
Yeah, early 60s.
Or the movies anyway. The novels go back further, I'm sure.
Right. So Alan Moore has some commentary on James Bond as a character, kind of specifically framed around that period of time in the early 60s with Sean Connery.
Mm-hmm.
You go back and watch some of those movies, anybody who did that stuff today would be in prison.
Like what, for example?
Like, he was sitting at a pool. I forget which movie it was, but he's sitting at a pool and a beautiful woman walks by him. He makes some snappy remark and slaps her on the butt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like prevalent throughout the entire movie. There's little elements that would now be considered significant sexual harassment, especially in the workplace. And even some of the way that he responds with, Moneypenny?
Mm-hmm.
James Bond.
Yeah.
Yeah, their relationship, just the verbal stuff, is totally inappropriate by today's standards.
Mm-hmm.
So if the movie industry in the 60s, it might have been affected by popular culture then. All that stuff seemed very appropriate. So I would think as a culture, the movie industry as a whole, when you had there wasn't a lot of people, but very few people with a huge amount of power, they were going to use that power to get whatever they wanted, just like that pretty much throughout history, anybody who has that type of power.
Yeah, I'm sure it didn't start in the 20th century. Now, knowing how Brubaker kind of put this together, and I don't think anything is in there by accident, I thought it was interesting that Charlie always leaves his glasses on during sex. I wonder what that's about. It looks weird. We see him in bed with Maya in a number of scenes, and he's always wearing his glasses.
Oh, I want to say that there was a small hint at maybe they didn't want to confuse him with another character.
That could be too.
Because he breaks his glasses, right? And that's one of the ways that Dottie can tell who he is when he's in disguise.
Yeah, later on. Mm-hmm.
So I guess he's about the same build and same size as the other actor.
The guy who's usually wearing the bandages. Yeah.
Right. Or I don't know. I don't wear glasses, so maybe some dudes do that.
Yeah, I don't know.
I did want to talk about the artwork, though.
Yes, so did I. Go ahead.
It's amazing. Um, being an artist and trying to do comic books, it's really difficult to, one, create a likeness, and two, be consistent with that likeness throughout the entire story.
Mm-hmm.
And everything is like spot on. I mean, there's even likenesses of Clark Gable and some of the Ronald Reagan.
Right, yeah, some real life actors appear in the story.
Yeah, and the characters are all very realistically rendered, even though there's some abstraction. I I felt like you just got pulled right into the story. The artwork does that. There's no. I really like the color. I don't think there was a lot of, things distracting from what the focus of the story was. You definitely got a sense of setting every single panel, and yeah, the colors, the inks, the drawings themselves, the penciling, it all works together extremely well.
Mm-hmm. And so I did a little bit of research, and Sean Phillips uses photo reference quite a bit. I think he does a better job of making it look smooth than some artists do. Sometimes when artists use photo reference in comics, it'll look really stiff. It'll look almost like there are actual photos in the comic.
Like in Ex Machina?
Yeah, that's a good example. Yes. And this doesn't, in most cases, doesn't have that photo reference stiffness to it. In a few cases, it bothered me a little bit. Like, there's a panel where Charlie punches a mirror and breaks it, and it looked to me like he was just holding his fist against a broken mirror. It didn't have much action to it, much movement, but most of the time I thought the art was pretty smooth and not so stiff.
The other thing that some artists do, and we reviewed a couple of books that were like this, where they just kind of rotoscope the photo reference. So they took photos of the story all the way through, and then they traced over it. You remember that was one from IDW. I don't remember what the story was, though.
Yeah, well, that was true of Ex Machina, too.
Ah, okay. And you can definitely tell. I think that's one of the things that keeps the artwork really smooth. Is this isn't a direct translation. I think the reference part is accurate, as far as he probably refers to it so that he can keep the characters straight. But it's definitely his own mind's interpretation of what he wants to see in each panel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that helps out with the flow too, from panel to panel, instead of just being kind of stuck with a photo that you have that is supposed to tell the story. It seems like the story was planned out visually all the way through, so it wasn't limited by a camera and a lens.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the artist's mind that kind of opened up the scene so that it flows from one panel into the next.
Yeah, I was just rereading. I didn't get to the end. I reread about the first half of the story this evening before we started recording, and there was one scene where something bothered me a little bit. At the end of issue 2, there's a scene where Charlie goes to find Gil in the graveyard at Valeria's grave. And I realized that reading that scene before, I hadn't gotten a clear sense of where they were, I think. And I think it's because, like, every panel, including the first one, just frames characters really tightly. And I think it would have helped if there had been more of a wide shot to really show us the cemetery. But as it is, you have to kind of pay close attention to the backgrounds because there's not really anything surrounding the characters. It's just kind of graves or whatever in the background. If you look closely, you can see it. But I think reading it kind of quickly, I missed where they were.
Did you go to the first page of that chapter?
Well, yeah, the chapter starts in the graveyard.
And it says the funeral is a small affair, and then you have the priest.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I guess
it's like a medium range, not a very wide one. But
yeah, the first panel you can see Gil's whole body standing in front of the grave, but the panel borders are all pretty close to him. So, I mean, this was something I think we talked about in Ex Machina too, where if you use photo reference, you tend to end up with a lot of shots from eye level and kind of close up.
So we're looking at the panel that's directly under the big black block that says "The Death in Me."
Now I'm talking about so near the end of that chapter.
Oh, I see it. I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah, it's just near the end of that, where it says, "And it makes him hate himself even more than he already does." And you can see there's some kind of one of those little building graves that rich people use in the background. Mausoleum. Yeah. And I didn't quite catch what was right in front of Gil, but it's the freshly turned
hamburger meat.
Earth. Yeah, it could be hamburger meat. It could be a piece of rock. I wasn't sure, but it's the dirt. And, dirt is hard to draw, I think. And then you can see a headstone, that headstone that we saw at the beginning of the issue that looks like a book.
Yeah.
A little bit back from there. But they're all pretty close-up shots. And you can kind of pick out cemetery stuff in the background, especially on the last page of that scene. There's some gravestones, but...
You don't think that's to serve the purpose of, like, focusing on the expression of the emotions?
Well, it just... I would have liked a little bit more kind of scene setting of where we were in that scene. I didn't quite catch the location there, I think. Anyway, it's a fairly minor point, I guess. But I think it's a problem that happens with photo reference. And actually, I'm planning to talk to some other people about photo reference in an upcoming episode. So a little teaser there.
So how much photo reference are we talking about for this story?
I don't know exactly. I mean, obviously, I'm looking at the beginning of the next issue, and there's it's a flashback to 1928, and there's an old car there that I'm sure he must have looked up some photos of 1920s cars. But I mean, I would doubt that he had people pose for every single panel.
Because this panel in particular doesn't seem like it would require photo reference.
Yeah, I don't really know the extent of the photo reference.
Well, and the reason why I'm asking is because it can either be, like you're saying, being limited by the photo reference, or when he was blocking everything out, he chose not to have a big, wide establishing shot.
Mm-hmm.
Which would have nothing to do with whether he was using photo reference or not. It was simply a decision made by the artist, right?
Right, yeah, that's true. But I think if you're doing photo reference, it depends on how much you're relying on the photo reference, I guess. But you might not have any photo reference for like a higher shot or something like that. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm interested in finding out what kind of photo reference they use, because if it's just like character references where you have faces with different expressions on it, and maybe cars and clothing and period stuff, that would be entirely different than going through trying to shoot panel to panel and trying to draw directly off of a photo.
Right, which I think is what, I cannot remember the artist's name, but I think that's what was done in a lot of Ex Machina.
Right.
But this I'm not quite sure. Let's call up Sean Phillips and ask him.
Yeah. Good idea.
Now I was thinking about the title. I wonder, so I mean, maybe a lot of things are fading out in this story. I think Charlie's kind of fading out. And the scandals fade out because they keep getting covered up by the studios. What do you think is fading out here?
I thought they really focused on Valeria. Is that her name?
Yeah.
That she was supposed to be this big star, and this was her chance, this movie. And as the story progresses, her her role in that movie, and kind of like her entire existence just starts to fade out.
Right. Yeah, they completely reshoot all the scenes with Maya, and Val is not in the movie anymore.
And the cover story, that she committed suicide, all that kind of stuff, just kind of they get to a point where they just forget about her altogether, except for a couple of the main characters, Charlie and Gil, and
Right.
and who's the other producer? Victor Thursby, is he the one?
Well, yeah, I know he misses Val, but I don't think Thursby is really trying to find out what happened.
No, I don't think he is either, but he was really affected by the fact that they were removing her parts from the film. So he had a special edit made.
Oh, yeah.
Special cut of the film, because he didn't want her to just fade away.
Yeah.
I don't know what the interview said, but what I picked up was that maybe he was the one that kind of pulled her out of the situation as a child actress.
Yeah.
They had a relationship.
Well,
like
in fact,
father.
In that interview, Brubaker mentions, you remember that scene at the funeral where the African American guy Flapjack, who was in the Crazy Kids movies, he's complaining that her stage name was put on the gravestone. But it's now, was it in the interview or was it in the blog? One of them was suggesting that, and I think it was the blog actually, the criminal blog, that actually maybe Thursby understood that she didn't, she was glad to get out of her old life and her old name, and that was why he, intentionally put her stage name on it.
Because that's who she wanted to be.
Because, that's who she wanted to be. She didn't want to be Jenny Summers.
So I thought that was intriguing at the end. So I feel like there's a lot of stories, and George Lucas, he can call your podcast or whatever and complain about my statement. But in the prequels, I think that's the thing that he did wrong, was that he didn't maintain enough mystery throughout the story. He spoon-fed the audience too much.
It took us 30 whole minutes to get to Star Wars.
Yeah. We're progressing. We're getting older. And that was the thing that was really insulting and turned me off about the prequels. And they do it in other movies like Highlander 2. They go through and they explain everything of why there are the immortals and that kind of thing. And I'm sure you haven't seen the movie, right?
No, of course not.
Of course not. But I think amateur writers, they focus too much on, well, I need to make the connections for the audience. Otherwise, they're just not going to get this. And I really enjoyed the story, even though, like I said, at the end, there isn't this big epiphany where, everything is right in the world at the end. Everything is still wrong. It might even be more screwed up than it was before.
Yeah, although other amateur writers tend to obscure too much.
That's true, too.
So, yeah, you have to kind of...
Careful balance.
Get it exactly right. Don't make it too obvious or too unclear.
But I felt like there was enough of everything kind of threaded together that we're curious about the characters, we're curious about their relationships, we're also curious about the plot and where this is going. So those three elements, I think, really kept me engaged in the story.
Yes, definitely. And one other point I wanted to make is that because Charlie is drinking all the time and has PTSD, you can't always rely on what he's telling us. He's not a reliable narrator sometimes. And there's a scene late in the series where he thinks he's remembering a conversation he had with I forgot the character's name, the horn rimmed glasses guy, but it's a conversation that we've already seen him have with that guy in a different location. So he's misremembering something.
Yeah.
So it's not such a big reveal as he thinks it is.
Right.
So that adds another layer of interestingness. Is that a word?
Intrigue?
Sure. Let's go with that. Intrigue. Okay, but yeah, it was good, and maybe I'm going to have to read some of that criminal stuff, too.
Yeah, me too. I really enjoyed this story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I've talked about the things that are important to me when I read a story, and I didn't really walk out of this one where I was like questioning my philosophy on life, but I did enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I thought it was a really, really good story. I think I've said in the past, you have to have emotionally engaging characters for me to get interested in the story, and I felt like the characters in this story were exactly that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So what was your rating? We used to do that. I don't know.
Rating? I don't know. We haven't really done ratings in a long time. What was our scale even?
It went to like 10.
10? Sure, I'll give it a 10. Why not?
Sure, me too.
Yeah. Okay. The Fade Out is published by Image. Coming up, Kumar just returned from San Diego Comic-Con. How has the event changed since Kumar was last there in 2004? How did he work around the crowds? Who did he get to meet there? How much more elevated has Stan Lee become since 2004? That and more. But first, if you value the content on Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Polls, if these shows have helped you get a new perspective on something or to discover something new, help us keep going with a monthly donation via Patreon. If you pledge at least $3 a month, you can access additional content on Patreon. For more information on becoming a patron, go to patreon.com/deconcomics. If you'd rather send a one-time donation via PayPal, use the email address donate@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support in keeping the show going.
I'm Batman.
And I'm Robin.
This is Tim.
And this is Paul.
To the Bat Polls! The iTunes reviews are in on To the Bat Polls podcast. A terrific podcast, Rave's Got a Rugrat, that brings review, film analysis, and sociological impact to episode-by-episode musings without ever losing the feeling of two brothers with towels tied around their necks, running through the backyard. Unmissable. You've heard the reviews, now try it for yourself. New episodes on the first, third, and fifth Thursdays of the month on iTunes or Stitcher, or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com.
Wild!
For nostalgia, analysis, and fun, it's
To the Bat Polls.
All right, now I'm talking with Kumar, who's in Melbourne. He just got back from San Diego. How are you doing?
Great.
Okay, that's good.
I'm trying to sound really positive and not jet lagged, and I'm not. My jet lag is not too bad.
Yeah. Okay. So now this was your first time there at the con in over a decade, right?
That's right. Yeah, last time was 2004.
So how has it changed in 12 years?
Well, it's the crowds are brutal. Compared to what it was like, especially on Saturday. But I saw some stats. I don't know. I think the first time I went in '97, I think they were getting about 40,000 people, and I saw a stat for 2015 that said 130,000. It's kind of crazy, but it's. The massive lines and stuff are kind of avoidable. Like, they've arranged it in such a way that those lines don't bother you. And there's these things called, there are these panels in what's called Hall H. Mm-hmm. And Hall H is where it seats 6,500, but they have the mega panels there, like Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, the big Star Trek panel was there. They had an Aliens 30th anniversary panel with Sigourney Weaver and stuff. Now, stuff for that, people camp out overnight to get in, like a day before. So And it's not an exaggeration at all. People
Yeah,
come with
I've heard
sleeping
about
bags.
that before.
But they've got this system where they have these, I don't know what to call them, but they've got it all worked out. So they've arranged it in a way, and you don't even notice those people. Like, you don't see them. They're just like at their own convention. And sometimes upstairs, like in the panels, the regular panels, and they're like the second biggest ones I think are in room 20. And, sometimes when you're trying to go from one part of the hall to the other, sometimes you have to stop for some traffic that's crossing into a room. But otherwise, it's all right. The exhibit hall floor was very busy at certain times, especially on Saturday. But there's one side of it in particular that's really crowded, and the other side is not as bad. So the side, just like it's like Marvel and DC and like the movie studios and stuff like Fox and stuff they're kind of all loaded into one half of the hall, and that area is really crammed in. And anytime there's any celebrity stuff going on, like there was a Suicide Squad panel, there was no getting through there. And the security guys are always saying, keep moving or you will be removed. But nobody's moving. Like
you will be terminated.
Everybody's crowding into the, just crowding. They're just stopped and standing. They've got their phones out trying to get pictures. I could, 10 years ago, I could have understood where they were coming from, and I would have stopped, 10, 15 years ago, I would have stopped to take a picture of Will Smith from 20 meters away. But now I was just like, it was not of any interest to me. But anyway, yeah, so that's kind of where the crowds were. But the thing is, it's kind of, the show is kind of splintered, and I got this from a conversation I had with Tom Spurgeon there, which we'll maybe get to a little bit later, but...
Okay, you ran into him. Good.
I did.
He didn't make it to Mocha, so I didn't get to meet him there.
Right, so I did see him there, and there's kind of a long story behind that, too, but there's a lot of different... Like, there's not one thing that everybody is clamoring around, and Tom said that, like, when the Twilight books were really huge during that period, like, it seemed like most of the people, or a large percentage there was a huge Twilight chunk. And now it's like, it's more fractured. There's more smaller groups into lots of different things. But certain things like anything that happened, and the thing about like the Suicide Squad signing or whatever is it's happening in the actual DC booth on the exhibit hall floor. It's not in another area. So it's causing a big traffic jam right there.
Traffic jam, bottleneck.
Yeah. So that stuff like that still seemed to draw everybody around, even if how interested are they? I don't know, but yeah.
Okay. Did you watch any of the like big movie premieres or TV show things or trailers or anything?
No.
No.
No, and I'll tell you what, there were a few that I was interested in. Like, I would have loved to have gone to the Star Trek panel. But that was Hall H. And I just crossed it off the list because my feeling was I came a very long way and I don't want to spend a day in a line. It was just that simple. And as soon as I got there, like, I went to preview night and I got a kind of sense of the floor, and to walk, and this is also not an exaggeration, but to go from one side to the other is literally 20 minutes. So I was looking at that after the first night and I was like, okay, I need to reevaluate. And I had a list of all the things like, some panels I need to go to because I need to meet face to face with certain business contacts or whatever, and other panels that I just wanted to go and geek out at. And immediately I was like, oh, you know what, I gotta start crossing stuff off this list. So each night I'd go back to my hotel room and I'm like, okay, what can I cross off for tomorrow? The 20 things I've listed, can I knock out 15 of these? So it became that kind of, it just became a process of elimination so that I would have something more manageable. to get through. And I found that made it a more enjoyable show. Like, you really got to plan. You got to have minimal objectives. And try to meet those, and I think you can have a pretty good time at that show. But yeah, I didn't go to any of the thing is, you can go to, after the Hall H panels, I think later at the end of the day, they rebroadcast some of those in another location, like in the hotel next door or something like that. But I didn't even go to any of those. It was just like at 9 p.m. I was like, no, this is too much. But the other thing about it too is, like, even if you wait in line, like, the other thing that has become a big thing that wasn't 10 years ago or 12 years ago is exclusives, which is like toys or comics that you can only get at the con. It seems to mostly be about toys. So what happens is, and also autographs. Autographs have changed too. Like, if you want a celebrity autograph, these all happen on the upper floor. And they open up at 9 a.m. But what happens is people start lining up at 4, 5, or 6 o'clock. They line up, they come in, and then it seems like there's a lottery system for the autographs. So even if you have lined up at 6 a.m. to get an autograph with the cast of, I don't know, name some TV show, even if you have lined up at 5 or 6 a.m. and you get to the front of the line, it seems like often there's a lottery system and you might not get picked. So, you've waited for hours and you don't get... And it's the same for the exclusives too. So a lot of these were based on a lottery system. Oh, you want to buy this, Star Wars action figure, which is only available at the con or whatever. Well, you got to line up at 4 a.m., get to the front of Hasbro line, and hope you pull the red bead out of the bag that grants you this wristband that you can go and wait in line 2 more hours to actually purchase the thing. And I was like, I don't want to do anything that involves standing in a line for more than like 20 minutes. So there was stuff like, I thought, oh, Ashton would really like that toy and he would think it would be really cool to get it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to stand in line for 7 hours, to get this thing. And I crossed all those things off the list. So I didn't do any of the really, glamorous panels. And there was even one with the writers of Star Trek that I was like, oh, that would have been good, and it conflicted with the manga industry panel that I legitimately had to go to, so I cut that one out as well, unfortunately.
I see. Yeah. I suppose you heard about the controversy about the Killing Joke animated movie.
Oh, yeah, I read about it, Sometimes it's more fun to read about these things than to actually be there and have to sit through them, probably. Yeah, but Azarello going off on some fan, oh my god, unbelievable. That guy. He was the mastermind, quote unquote, before Watchmen as well, so I don't really have a lot of respect for him.
But yeah, I was looking around, Googling around this evening, I found there was an article that 20th Century Fox pulled out of the con this year because there was so much piracy of stuff last year.
Oh, really? Yeah, they might not have had any Hall H stuff. They did have a thing on the floor, like they had an exhibit on the floor. I think Marvel had pulled out for a few years. Like, there was a amazing thing where a couple of years Marvel was not at Comic-Con, and it was like, what the hell is going on?
Oh, and
it was just like not a thing for them. But they do have a booth there now, a giant booth. But there's no, as far as I could tell, there was nothing comics related there, really. I mean, I walked by and I picked up a free Doctor Strange comic. But why are they giving away free Doctor Strange comics? Only because there's a Doctor Strange movie. But everything there was movie related for Marvel. The DC booth had a bit more flavor because they had like these giant images up all around, and some of them were like, they had like some Vertigo stuff. One was Preacher, and of course there's a TV show. But anyway, they had a Preacher. They had like a Alfred E. Newman. So it was kind of like more. There's more variety. There's more diversity at the DC, the physical appearance of the DC booth. Whereas Marvel was just a big Marvel, and every time there was some exhibit or something, as far as I could see, that was clogging up the aisles, it was some movie-related thing. Speaking of which, Stan Lee, he has become some sort of movie celebrity. People seem to be crazy for Stan Lee there. And they were charging, it was $100 for autographs with Stan Lee. When I went in 97, I stood in line for maybe 10 minutes. And I got Stan Lee to autograph this thing. And I remember there was this kid in front of me, little kid who was maybe 4 years old or 5 years old, who had a Superman bookmark for Stan Lee to sign. And Stan Lee looked at it and said, well, what is this? I didn't do this. Oh, whatever, I'll sign it anyway. And he signed it, and it was the coolest thing. And there's no way, in order for that little 4-year-old kid to get a signature from Stan Lee today, he would have to pay $100 and wait in line, literally, for 2 hours. Or more, if he wanted the free, I think there were free autographs as well. But it just, it's become a very strange thing. Yeah, in general, all that kind of stuff.
I see. Yeah, I was just checking. Stan's 93 now.
Yes, and I can kind of understand. I was too. I would have liked to have seen Stan Lee, and he's not going to be doing many more of these conventions. I know he's not doing any more outside of the States at this stage. So I was kind of like, yeah, it would be really good, but just thought, $100 and hours of waiting, and kind of decided against it in the end.
Damn. So what were some good panels you went to?
Okay, well, I went to, so on the Thursday, I went to the Lisa Hannawalt panel. Okay. And that was run by Tom. Now, I had emailed Tom before the show, and he said, sure, I'm not sure about my schedule, but here's my phone number, and call me and we'll hook up or whatever. And I thought, well, how am I going to call I don't have a phone, first of all. And I thought, how am I really going to call this guy in the middle of this circus of a convention and try to arrange a meeting time? And even at the Hannawalt panel, I was like, there wasn't really a way to interject that was not awkward. So I thought, I'll just forget about it. But that was a great panel, lots of funny artwork. She's got a new book out called Hot Dog Taste Test, which is mostly food-related comics that she's done for various publications. And that was really cool. Then I went to one about 3D comics. This is something that's like... It's actually about underground 3D comics, so it was kind of more about how underground comics kind of started doing some 3D stuff well after the 3D boom had died. That was, it started like 15 minutes late due to technical difficulties. And, the guy who was running the camera, for some of the panels were videoed, he came up to me and he said, I've got 2 other panels or 3 other panels I'm doing in other rooms. Can I ask you to operate this camera for me? I was like, okay. So I was running the camera, and I made some quote-unquote artistic choices there. There's some... I don't know what they do with these videos anyway, but... so that was kind of neat. There was, it was just something that, I would be interested in. And Thursday night was also the manga translation panel, which was the one that I couldn't get onto. But it was quite interesting. Let me think. Friday. Okay, so Friday there was a panel about Kramer's Ergo, the art anthology. That was a really great panel. And when I went to that, that's where I ran into Tom, and he was in the audience for that. He was just there. And I don't know if he'd want me to reveal this or not, but he was multitasking because he was nodding off occasionally during the panel. That when we had a good chat about the convention and how it's changed and stuff, and it was a really interesting panel. And I think Johnny Ryan and John Famron and Matt Groening was on it, which is what the surprising thing to me about the panel, the Kramer's panel, was there were maybe about 30 people there, which kind of shows you how fractured Comic-Con has become. Now, I don't know, there's 130,000 people coming through on the weekend, and about 30 show up for a panel on what's probably the best alt comics anthology there is, with Matt Groening on the panel. I thought at least some Simpsons people would be showing up, to have a look at him, at least or something. Yeah, it just seemed like a very low turnout to me, for what was a really neat panel. It was interesting how much there was a lot of insight into what the editor does on an anthology like that, or what Sammy Harcum does on Kramer's or about. So that was a really cool one. And that evening was the manga publishing panel, which had a lot of marketing directors and presidents of various manga publishers and about the state of the industry. That was it was moderated by Deb Aoki, and that was a very good one as well. One of the panels I skipped, or I had to skip because I had a conflict of some sort, was the Mad magazine panel. And I was kind of interested to go because I can't remember who was on it. I think John Ficarra, one of the editors, was on there. I can't remember who else, but it said they were giving out prizes for the dumbest questions. And it just seemed like a fun panel, but I just couldn't go for one reason or another. But then I was down at Sergio Aragonés' booth, waiting to get something signed, and I saw John Ficarra, and I read his name tag, and I was like, oh, that's John Ficarra. And he came up, and he said he picked up a box of something. He had a big box of papers that he got from behind Sergio's booth. And I was like, what's he got there? And he opened it up, and it was about 500, literally 500 or 1,000 Trump University certificates, diplomas. And it made me kind of regret that I had missed out on this panel. So it just seemed like it was, even seeing that box was funny.
Yeah.
So it probably would have been a pretty good show. Let me think. Saturday, the two I went to one which was the spotlight on Tsutomu Nihei, and he's the author of Knights of Sidonia, which I translated. So that was cool because I actually got to meet him. I was introduced to him by the president of Vertical, which is the English language publisher.
Yeah, I saw that on Facebook. You said it was the first time you'd ever met the creator of something you translated.
Yeah, first time. In fact, I think very few... I've only ever heard of one other translator actually ever meeting the author. Or two other cases. One was Fred Schott meeting Tezuka. And one was someone else I can't remember. It's unheard of. So it was very cool. I was totally embarrassed, couldn't really say much. He's a very soft-spoken, quiet guy, and he was not really, he was a bit, I think, sideswiped, surprised by having to be introduced to this guy who speaks English as well. So it was kind of awkward, but very cool, great moment. And it was a funny panel. He was there with the producer and director of the anime version of Knights of Sidonia. And they were joking. It became a running joke how little Nihei said about anything. And they were joking about how he says even less in Japan. So, and how he was being actually more talkative because he was at San Diego or something like that. So it was quite funny. And the other one I went to on Saturday was one called Weird Love, with Craig Yo, who's publishing the Weird Love comic book from IDW, which is, if you don't know it, it's vintage romance comics from the 50s and 60s, sometimes 70s, but usually, which are, in retrospect, are totally weird, like,
They haven't done anything to them. It's just that
No,
in the context of now, they feel weirder than.
Oh
they
yeah,
did then.
like I was in a teenage sex club, or one is like, or they involve some sort of spanking, or there's like ones where hippies, like these girls start going out with hippies, and then they realize the error of their ways and go back to the straight guys, things like that. So it was kind of about those comics, but it was also interestingly, there was a woman there whose name I don't remember, but there was a rundown of the history of just alternate love stories in comics, like it could be homosexual romances or things like that. And also about female artists in comics. And there was also a performance group there who are from California who apparently go around doing live readings of romance comics. And they did a few performances which were pretty funny. And that was a very cool panel as well. And then I didn't do any. Oh, and then I went to the best and worst manga. I went to about half of that one, and then I had to go. Best and
worst manga.
Yeah, they do that every year. It's usually moderated by Deb again. And they just run down the best and worst manga of each year. And they do it by categories, like for young readers, for adult readers, and for new series, ongoing series. They have categories for them all, and they go through. And that's always a great panel. They always post transcripts online or whatever, or lists online afterwards. But it was great to sit in on one, even if it was only for half. That was cool.
Did you get to go around and talk to lesser known artists at their tables or anything like that?
A little bit. Like at signings I did. Like I went to the Daniel Klaus signing and Johnny Ryan, Lisa Hannawalt. So I kind of, because the lines there are no lines for these people. So you can go, the Hernandez brothers, you can just go and kind of hang out for a couple minutes because there's nobody else waiting. Where there are very few other people, and they've got a lot of time for you, and they're happy to talk about stuff. But they've kind of been, and there's an area in that less busy side of the hall. There is kind of an area where there's some indie stuff happening, and there is an artist alley, but they've shrunk down. They're the ghetto. They're the ghetto of Comic-Con.
Well, it's so overshadowed now by all the Hollywood stuff, and I saw even novels, non-comic stuff novels was coming in.
Yeah,
big authors. So yeah, the little guys I would think don't have much attention.
Yeah, I don't know. They're getting some incidental traffic through there, but I don't know if anybody's really seeking them out. I think I'm trying to remember who, I was expecting to be there and wasn't, but there was, there's a very small artist alley. I didn't know most of the people there, except for Peter Cooper was there, Ramona Fraden, there's some names in there, Wills Portaccio, there's some people hanging around there. They're like, oh yeah, I know who that is, or whatever. But Sergio had his own booth. It wasn't in the artist alley. It was in the small publishers kind of area. But yeah, I don't want to say they're ignored, but I just feel like the show is not necessarily the right show for them anymore. I don't know, but they're still going all the time, and I guess they must be getting something out of it for those particular artists for them to keep going back. But I'm trying to think of all the artists that have dropped out.
I seem to remember reading a year or two ago about some fairly major comics retailer like Mile High or somebody had decided not to go to San Diego anymore because they lost money every time.
Yeah, Mile High had decided to drop out, or he declared he was going to. I think it was just a threat, because he was there. Chuck Chuck Rosansky. He was there, but the Mile High booth was not like it was in the old days. It was much smaller. And I went in there, I was like, oh, maybe I'll find some good stuff. And they had very little selection. And I remember one year I went, and you could order stuff. You could go in. They had computer terminals set up, and you could type in what you wanted and order it, and they would bring it to the show, like, for the next day or whatever. It was a great system.
Wow.
But they didn't have that. They just had random packages. You were like, what? Yeah. The Bud Plant booth is great. I think it was much smaller than it was in the past, but there's so much cool stuff in there.
Like what?
Just like, you just get these cool art books, like, Bud Plant has always, I think Bud Plant's been operating for like 40 years or something, but you just find these weird old art books and stuff, and just neat, beautiful books about comics and stuff. And it was fun going through that stuff, and I'm glad the Bud Plant booth was there. But it seemed smaller. Every booth was quite small, and I saw how much they paid, and, because I was there with Fanfare, I managed to learn some nuts and bolts and stuff, but, a fairly small booth, which is not in Artist Alley or whatever, is costing I think it was like $3,200 for the weekend, which is a fair chunk of change for a small publisher.
Yeah.
For its tiny little booth, it seemed pretty full on, but yeah.
Okay. Well, what would you say was the biggest turnoff to you of everything you saw that weekend?
Biggest turnoff. I don't know. Maybe the Marvel booth. Like, not Marvel, but the booth that had there was no artwork on it or anything, and you looked at the signing schedule, like there was no comic artists on there, as far as I could tell. That was kind of
just all kind of movie based.
Movie-based, and I couldn't really see much, and it was, and just trying to, and whenever anything came on, just trying to walk past it, like the lines were so thick, and I don't know, it was there was something that was kind of a bummer about it. And I read online, it didn't affect me, but I read online that the security wasn't really well trained enough, and they were letting lines in the wrong order and stuff, and I wasn't really a part of that, but apparently there was some negativity around that, but
okay.
Yeah, otherwise it was a pretty good show. And I had a conversation with Deb at the Nihei panel. I ran into her there. And I was talking about how I thought maybe I should go to Anime Expo next year instead, which is in LA at the beginning of July. And she said, well, that's more of a fan show. Like, she said even she tries to set up, pro-oriented panels there about state of the industry or about translators or whatever. And she said they kind of are skeptical about it because they'd rather have more about, what's the best anime series of the year, or how to get into cosplay or whatever. That's more what the show is oriented towards. So I'm not really sure what the best option is for me, or what the best route is for professionally, what the better show to go to is.
Okay. Well, what was the most amazing thing about this San Diego this year?
Jeez, the most amazing thing was meeting Margaret Atwood and Slayer on the same day. And in a sense, the diversity, what the show has turned into and what the industry has turned into is, it sounds crazy that Margaret Atwood and Slayer and William Gibson were there, but they were all working on comic books. Like, Slayer has a comic book coming out, and Margaret Atwood is writing a comic book, and William Gibson has a comic book out. And they've all kind of gotten into this thing, and somehow they're all at this show, and it's made for a really wild, kind of crazy experience that there's a lot available to you. You can see almost anything. So I think that kind of diversity that's panned out. And, you know, seeing the compare, like, I mean, the demographic of people that was there compared to 97 was way different. And it was cool. Like, there was every size, shape, color of person there. And it wasn't at all like 97 when it was a bit more of a homogenous club.
So it wasn't like all the comic book guy clones
no,
anymore.
No, it wasn't like that. It was, you know, I would guess it was half women in attendance, maybe. It was just really, it was cool. I think the thing that I missed was there was no vibe. It's not like going to a concert where you turn to the stranger next to you and you're like, isn't it great that we're at XYZ's concert? You know what I mean? You're not all there for the same thing. I think that was kind of... I think that vibe was not there.
So it sounds like now it's more like going to a shopping mall and everybody's got their own target.
That's a really good analogy. I think that's right. Yeah, it is a bit. Everybody's going into a different store or whatever. Yeah, and you still got to crowd into the same elevators together. That's kind of the sense of it.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, like and the artists that you used to, you know, Jeff Darrow, waited 2 seconds, got his signature, managed to talk to him for a couple of minutes. Are you kidding? That's great. So in a way, selfish way, those indie artists being overshadowed by everything else, it kind of works out for us people that actually care about that stuff. It's very easy to kind of hook up with them. Yeah.
Okay.
We should say, on a completely unrelated note, rest in peace to Jack Davis and Richard Thompson on the same day.
I saw Jack Davis, Richard Thompson, musician?
No, Cul-de-sac.
Oh.
He passed away
wow.
today,
okay.
too. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I missed that.
I did post it on the Facebook page, and very few people noticed it. I think the Jack Davis news is kind of the bombshell for everyone, but I don't.
Yeah, I did see that one, but I haven't looked in the past few hours.
Yeah, no, I posted them both within 2 minutes of each other because I learned of them both within 2 minutes of each other.
I see.
But we knew Richard was sick for a long time.
Right, yeah, Parkinson's, I think.
Yeah, but it's still sad.
Yeah.
And, Jack Davis was 91, but still sad. But some of those EC guys they've got some longevity, because, I mean, John Severin lived to 91 as well. And,
yeah, a lot of the regular gang of idiots live a very long time.
Yeah, Al Jaffe is still around, and he's got to be like 95 or something crazy. I don't know.
Kumar has now been on Deconstructing Comics 3 weeks in a row. It's some kind of record. Right behind this episode in the feed, you can find last Thursday's episode of Critiquing Comics, where Mulele and I discussed the smart social commentary of Johnny Bluzit's The Nowhere Man. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and please try to keep it to about 30 pages. Critiquing Comics is released on the second and fourth Thursdays of the month. This coming Thursday on To the Bat Poles, Paul and I will discuss Otto Preminger's wild take on Mr. Freeze. To the Bat Poles is released on the first, third, and fifth Thursdays of the month. Look it up in iTunes or Stitcher. Deconstructing Comics is on Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, Patreon, and now also YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast or sending some feedback, write to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. Our theme is from bensound.com. Next week, a look at the Comic Art Tokyo event that was held in Tokyo on July 31st. Till next week, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.